Britjet's PSX tips, the 747 simulation by Aerowings PSX. For simulation purposes only, of course, this video, guys. And today we're going to look at handling a single engine failure in the PSX flight simulation. Well, if you get an engine failure on takeoff and it turns out to be an inboard failure, consider it your lucky day. They don't pose a particular problem from the point of view of handling, and the most likely problem would be not spotting it in the first place, particularly if it occurred before V1. Outboard failures, of course, more difficult, and they will be the subject of this video. We'll go on to look at those in more detail now. The secondary effect of yaw is roll, as we all know. So I'll just take you through a few pages of formula just to prove that point. And you like something simpler? How about that? Swept wing aircraft such as the 747 are designed for high-speed flight. An effect of the swept wing, however, is that if you yaw the wing, then the wing will produce uneven lift due to the fact that the surface area is increased on the wing that's going forward. And particularly for an engine failure, as soon as you get yaw, then the secondary effect roll will be very pronounced on a swept wing aircraft. Let's have a look at the link between yaw and roll with an engine failure. Number 4 engine will fail at 140 knots as we rotate. So the aircraft will yaw to the right, and as we get airborne it will then roll to the right. I want you to notice the delay between the yaw and the roll. Even as we come off the ground, there is a lag between the yaw and the roll. I'll fly it off the runway just using elevator, no rudder, no aileron, just to watch the effect of the engine failure. So here we go, running the simulation now, rotating the aircraft a little slower than normal. There's the failure, there's the yaw. As we come off the ground, we get the roll. So it's yaw first and then the roll. On the runway, if you exceed 5 degrees of bank, you are likely to scrape an engine pod, so that is your maximum. Now, a lot of pilots, professional or otherwise, need no help from me on learning how to do an engine failure on takeoff. But once upon a time in my training on full flight simulators, we did meet the occasional individual who struggled a little bit. And I developed a technique called the 4 R's for dealing with engine failures on takeoff. It conforms with Boeing and my company procedures, and it worked on the simulator and for all I know on the aircraft, and it works also on PSX. So I'll take you through those. Briefly then, recognition of the failure is important. I'll go through how that's done. Step number 2 is rudder. How much to apply and how to apply it. Step 3, rotating the aircraft off the runway, things to think about and how to control it. And finally, step 4, when you've got the thing airborne, reassessing what control inputs you've made and changing them as necessary. So which rudder to apply, and can we put in the wrong rudder by mistake? Well, a lot of pilots worry about putting in the wrong rudder, and I think they overcomplicate the issue. It depends what method you're using, I think. The 3 main methods here: 1, the balance at the top left, heading changes top right. They both require you to be looking inside the cockpit. And would you really be doing this as you rotate the aircraft off the runway? I personally have my doubts as to how intuitive these 2 methods are. In other words, how automatic they are for you to do. The rudder, of course, if the ball moves out to one side on the balance, then the rudder is used almost like kicking a football back into the middle. And the heading display, of course, if it increases, then you apply left rudder and vice versa. I think it's the vice versa thing which makes it a potential problem, and this is what confuses people. The visual method at the bottom, however, I don't think you can get this wrong. If you're driving down a road and your vehicle strays off to one side, then you will make the the correction automatically without thinking about it. And it's exactly the same on the aeroplane. So for me, the visual display is the way to go, but then I will leave you to look at all three methods and decide which you prefer. A little video here just to show how they react, and I'll run it a couple of times just to let you watch it. So here we go, coming up to rotate. Here is the failure. And just to give you a chance to watch it again, you see the balance and the heading changing quite rapidly, as is the yaw. So make your own mind up. As I say, I think the visual way is the way to go. You'll never get it wrong. Most pilots trying this for the first time get very excited. They apply too much rudder one way, then too much rudder the other way, and maybe back again, and all the time they are increasing their roll input. So in no time at all you can overbank the aircraft and scrape an engine pod. Now the 747 does not require full rudder for a single engine failure. It has authority to cope with two engines failing on the same side on a climb out. The amount of rudder you need, even for an outboard failure, is about where you see it on the status page here, with the rudder index just above one of the spoiler lines. So you can practice that. Now that's a guide. With full power you'd need slightly more, and with a partial failure or an inboard failure, obviously less. The idea is to stop the yaw. If you stop yaw, then you will stop roll, and it is roll which will damage the aircraft. Anything more than 5 degrees of bank near the ground on rotation can scrape an engine pod. It doesn't matter if the aircraft is going slightly sideways off the runway as long as the wings are level. And believe me, I've seen a lot of these in full flight simulators, and that is absolutely fine and is what happens normally. So you're going to apply the yaw, you're going to stop the yaw promptly with rudder application and make it as one application. Hopefully you'll be keeping the aircraft reasonably straight at the same time, but it's not a priority. Once you've put that rudder in, lock your input and don't do anything else with the rudders, because if you do, you'll get secondary effect of roll, which will be very confusing. So that's the initial rudder application. Let's watch a wings level rotation. Slower and to a lower attitude. This avoids a possible tail scrape. We'll follow the video through, and on this takeoff I'll apply a little bit too much rudder, just to emphasize the point that I'm not going to change it on the rotation. So let's play it through now and we'll see what happens. Coming to rotate, there's the failure, rudder being applied. You'll see it takes a while for the effect to show, but I've actually applied a little bit too much there. Nice slow rotation up, and we're now at our target attitude. You see the aileron there is actually being displaced some distance out to the right hand side, which is actually balancing the slightly incorrect rudder that I've got. But notice that throughout that maneuver I didn't change the rudder. Once you're clear of the ground, maybe at about 100 feet or so, then reassess your rudder. Two ways really. You can look at the control column displacement you've got to keep the wings level, or look at the balance indicator. Both of these are indicating that the right rudder needs to be displaced a little bit more. Control column pointing to the right, and the balance indicator a little bit like a football. When you move the rudder, just move it a tiny amount. When I was teaching this on full flight simulators, I used to specify something like a finger's width of rudder deflection. So whatever works for you, but it's a very small change, and then hopefully you will be in balance and on your way. The other thing to check is that your speed is correct. V2 is your minimum speed. You may well be well in excess of that, but check your attitude if your speed is getting low, particularly at high weights. Looking at a heavyweight takeoff, just a couple of differences. I've set this takeoff up to fairly closely simulate a heavyweight takeoff on PSX, and the same procedures apply, but this time there will be a split between the V1 and the VR. So you don't rotate the aircraft initially, you keep the aircraft straight with rudder until you reach VR, obviously. You will find at the high speeds we're at here, the rudder is very effective. You won't need as much rudder displacement as you do for lower speeds. Typically, the tendency is to over-control, so small changes to the rudder, and I'll let you change the rudder twice here. The first time to get the aircraft going straight after the initial failure, and then as you rotate off the runway, the nose wheel is coming off the runway, so it's not tending to keep the aircraft straight anymore, and you'll need to apply a second application of rudder to keep it straight. So let's just run this one through, and we are approaching V1 here, and the failure will occur at V1, of course. So number 4 failure, so here it comes, there's the failure. Rudder's going in, keep us pretty straight, not trying to get to the centre line, not moving the rudder now. Gentle rotation, lower and slower, and as we come off, a little bit more rudder being applied, just to keep the aircraft straight. And stopping at a lower pitch attitude, and then as we climb out, reassessing our speed against V2 and checking we have the right amount of rudder and reassessing it as necessary with a slight change, which you see there. So this can be a tricky manoeuvre, but in summary then, recognition should be straightforward, and if it's not, then you're probably overcomplicating it. Rudder, one application to keep straight. Rotation, slower and lower, the priority is to keep the wings level. And when you're clear of the ground, reassess with a very slight correction to get the aircraft in balance. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. The next one will be on managing the failure itself.